Hey guys, this is Kristen with Taz and Belly, and I'm super excited to be here at the Illustrated Faith blog today, sharing a page from my journaling Bible. You've probably already noticed, but this is a voiceover. I had some problems with the sound of the video, and so I'm going to do my best to narrate what I was working on, and hopefully it won't be painfully awkward. The first thing I'm going to do is just get our page ready. I'm going to apply some color to the background, and what I'm using here is watered down acrylic paints. These are actually by Master's Touch, and I picked them up on sale at Hobby Lobby for a little under $3 a tube. The color I'm using here is called Purple Red, which is really just a nice bubblegum pink color. I've added a lot of water to the paint to thin it out, and I'm just spreading it out in a really thin layer on the page. I actually considered using a watercolor wash to begin with, but I wanted to work with this color palette, and I didn't have this color pink in watercolors. You can also see that the paper is pretty wet at this point, so I'm just trying to be really careful as I apply the paint that I don't, pull too hard on the edges of the paper. I have pulled corners off using this same process, so you just want to be very careful while you're handling the wet page. You can also see that I have several sheets of copy paper behind the page that I'm working on. I do have the Illustrated Faith page protector, which I love, but when I'm painting like this, I tend to be a little messy, and so I like to use a larger piece of paper to protect my Bible pages, but I will use the page protector from the Illustrated Faith Genesis kit in a little while, so you'll be able to see how well it works. Now that the pink is nice and thick, I'm going to add a second color. This is called Vermilion, which is a nice orangey red, and I'm just going to try to blend the two colors together and get sort of an ombre effect. I had actually pulled some green paint to use as well, but I liked the way these two colors looked together, and so I decided not to use them after all. And it might be hard to tell at this point, but the text is completely readable, even with this thick layer of paint. While it's wet, it might be harder to tell, and you can especially see the text from the opposite side of the page, but once everything is dry, it should be very easy to read. Okay, so now the page is dry, and I actually just used a hairdryer to dry the page so that we could continue working. I do not have a heat gun, but if you do, that would work perfectly. But the hairdryer actually works great, especially when you're using heavier layers of paint. And I think that drying your page while you're holding the edge sort of helps keep the page flat and shows fewer wrinkles. I also wanted you to see that there's virtually no bleeding on the back side of the page. While the paint is wet, it seems like it'll be hard to read, but once it's dry, you have a really nice, clean page to work with on another day. And you'll notice that I got a little paint on the edges of the paper, but I'll likely just incorporate that into something else down the road so it doesn't bother me at all. And there's that Illustrated Faith page protector, which I'm just going to use to keep from getting paint on the other pages or on my Bible cover while we work. The verse we're focusing on today is Proverbs chapter 29, verse 18, and I actually prefer the Message translation to that of my ESV Bible. It says, "If people can't see what God is doing, they stumble all over themselves, but when they attend to what He reveals, they are most blessed." Because the verse focuses on seeing things, I picked up these fun eyeglasses stickers to use. I like the top pair especially, and I wasn't sure in the beginning where I wanted to use them, but I think you'll really enjoy what we end up doing with them. Our sermon series last month was called Dream Again, and so I decided I wanted to use the word dream somewhere on the page. I love these homespun alpha stickers from the Illustrated Faith Etsy shop, and I wanted to incorporate them somehow onto my page. My only problem was I didn't want to limit myself to a single color of ink or to solid letters, so I decided to use them as patterns to cut other letters from colorful scrapbook papers that I already had on hand. I've already cut the letters out, so I just laid them out in the margin to try to figure out where exactly I wanted them to be. And I just use an adhesive roller to attach the letters to my Bible margin. The letters aren't at all precise. I just used the stamp as a pattern and drew them as close to the stamp letter forms as I could, except for the D, because I wanted it to be an uppercase letter just because I liked that shape. I mostly just made sure that the sizes of the letters and the proportions were similar, but I freehanded them using a pencil on the back side of my paper scraps. And I probably should have been rolling that adhesive using, the page protector or some other piece of paper. And so I got adhesive on my Bible page several times, but you can always just use a white rubber eraser to gently rub it off if that happens. My original plan had been to stamp the word again right next to dream, but I didn't have quite enough room. And I considered stamping it in several places on both sides of the margin, but ultimately I liked it right below the word dream. And here I'm just using the Stays On ink in jet black. I'm not an expert stamper, and I had never used these stamps before this tutorial, and I also had never tried stamping at all on this type of paint, so I wasn't quite sure how well it would work. And you'll be able to see that they did not stamp perfectly, but since I prefer my Bible pages to be a little loved and worn, it didn't bother me that they weren't perfect, and we will work on a way to make them look a little bit more precise if that's more your speed. So while those stamped letters were drying, I just decided to go on and do some other things on this Bible page. I'm loving these illustrated faith pens. If you guys haven't tried them yet, I highly recommend getting them from the Etsy shop. I think you can buy them in singles and in 3-packs, and I might have already ordered 10 since I got my original pen. I'm just going to highlight the verse here by drawing a box around it, I think, and I usually like to embellish my boxes a little bit. Sometimes I just underline the verse or draw an arrow to the verse, and then sometimes I like to draw a box around it, so it just varies from page to page. And now that the ink had had a few minutes to dry on the stamps, I just turned my Bible and I'm going to use the illustrated faith pen to outline the letters just so that we can read them a little bit better. A lot of times when I use embellishments or stickers, especially when there's not a lot of contrast between the letters and the background, I'll just take my pen and outline those. I feel like every time I do this, I get in a hurry and I end up writing all over the sticker, and that actually did happen this time as well, but fortunately it was on that last letter, which was a pretty busy pattern anyway, and so hopefully it's not too noticeable. When I'm working in my Bible with my daughters, I always tell them that it doesn't matter how much planning we do or what our vision is for the page, there's always some little mess up. And so I try to encourage them not to be too bummed about it. And so I just sort of went with the flow here, even though I was pretty frustrated with myself. And at this point, most of the ink had had time to dry on the letter stamps, and so I'm going to go back with just a larger art marker and fill in those letters just a little bit more. I was actually planning on using one of the Illustrated Faith tabs at the top of the page, maybe an orange one or a pink one, but I, at this point, still hadn't figured out what to do with my glasses, and so I decided to make a tab out of scrapbook paper and stick the glasses on them. So it's going to be a little bit oversized, but I really ended up liking the way it worked with this page overall. I used the floral paper and I just cut out a rectangle, taking the size of the glasses into account, and then I folded it in half and just used a punch to punch out the corners of the tab so that it would look more like a tab and less like, I just cut it out of scrapbook paper. I just stuck the sticker right on the front of the tab, and then tried to figure out, the best place on the page for it to work. I won't lie, I was a little frustrated when I started trying to figure out where to put it, because it was so wide that it was going to cover up my N. And even though I thought this was very well thought out in my head, obviously I should have taken the width of that section of text into consideration before I went to the trouble of making a tab. So I ended up just using some scissors and trimming it down on both sides, and then just rounding the corners with scissors. I would have loved to have used the corner punch again, but the paper was a little bit thick once I had the sticker on it, and it wouldn't work. So I just did my best to round the corners. And yes, those are hair cutting scissors, because that's what happens when you have a 5-year-old and an 8-year-old who like to raid your journaling stash. And none of my supplies ever seem to be in the same place 2 days in a row, so I was reduced to using bathroom scissors to cut my tab out today. And I just used the same adhesive roller to roll some, glue on the back of this tab to stick it at the top. And I put glue all the way along the surface, both to stick to the top of the page and to the front and back of the tab would stick to each other. And of course, once I stuck it on my page, I realized that I didn't get the adhesive all the way to that right-hand edge, and so it wasn't sticking to the page there on the edge, and I felt like it needed to. So very carefully, I peeled it up, and that's what's good about that adhesive roller, is it's usually repositionable. And I added a little bit more glue to the edges, and then stuck it on there just a little bit better. And I love that I have a blank tab on the back side, so along with those paint marks on the edge, I'm sure I can come up with something fun and pink to do on that side of the page as well. And yes, the tab is huge and sticks up pretty far out of the top of my Bible, but I'm pretty much in love with it.